All righty, welcome everybody, and welcome to the Leadership Exchange. This podcast is for business leaders and it's by business leaders. My name is Jason Zickerman, and I'm the CEO of the Alternative Board. We're a global membership based organization that we help business owners and business leaders improve their businesses in ways that change their lives. So, I'd like to introduce our guest today. I'm super excited about this. So, Roey, thank you so much for being with us today. In today's episode, my guest is Roey Diefendorf, who has an amazing 50-year career helping clients to achieve amazing success to prepare their families for more than money or their wealth. Most recently, Roey is a founding member for More Than Money 360. He's an educator, he's an innovator, and he's founded an amazing nonprofit. In our conversation today, we're going to cover a lot of ground on leadership and lessons that Roey has developed during his incredible career. So, Roey, once again, thank you. I appreciate you being here. It's an honor to be able to sit with you and chat a little bit. So, welcome.
Jason, I'll follow you any place. So just you lead, I'll follow.
You're a gentleman. You are a gentleman. So let's talk about your business beginnings. You've now led a business that's been in your family for an incredible 150 years. What is it now? We're going into the fifth generation. Is that
Fifth
right?
generation is in
Five
there.
generations. When we talk about generational businesses, we always say any business that makes it to the third generation is a dynasty. So the fact that you're now at the fifth generation is absolutely mind blowing. So you've been involved for yourself a very long time. And I love the whole thing about how businesses originated. Would you mind sharing a little bit about how you got involved in this business in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, this is just to go back. That whole 150 years wasn't as smooth as you might think,
Never
because my
is.
great grandfather, founded in 1875, that was a good transition to my grandfather, and that went well, but he died prematurely. So, in that interim gap, my father was only 10 years old at the time, in steps a cousin. And so then my father, after he finishes college, goes off to the war. He comes back and he says, "Okay, well, I'm ready to get involved in the business." And his cousin said, "What business?" "It was my business." And so the succession guy, and so my father had to really basically start from scratch, had the principles, knew some of the clients, but it was not what you would call a real good handoff.
No.
And so they sort of went parallel tracks. Fortunately, my father's success story blossomed. But I really didn't know much about the business. And probably around the age of 16 or 17, I started asking questions. I said, "What is it that you do?" And I started to listen to it. And all I could see was that, his goal was to help benefit clients. Now, again, we were in the wealth management, insurance, investment area. And I go, "Well, that sounds pretty interesting. You think I could do something like that?" She says, "Well, I don't know. You need a license." I said, How old do you have to be?" She says, "I don't know. Never, no one's ever asked us at this young an age." So at age 18, I had sold my first life insurance policy before I got out of high school, and I was off and running. And did that through college, went on to get a master's degree in insurance, and came back into the business back to New York and started, I would say at the ground floor. But I was fortunate enough to have the mentorship of my dad, and that was it. But once I found out what it was about, um, from day one, I never had a bad day. So I'm so thankful for that.
That's amazing. But you bring up mentorship, and that's really a question that I really wanted to spend a moment with you on about. I know how much you value mentorship. We've spoken about that many, many times over the years. Um, but I come across folks, whether it be a younger generation or just people in general, who don't necessarily really value mentorship. They believe that what might have worked for someone else or what's worked in the past, that won't work necessarily for them. So I honestly believe, because we've seen it for so many decades at this point, that that's really missing an opportunity to benefit from the experience and the wisdom of others. So you mind sharing a little bit about your mentor and why you feel that was so important to your actual success?
When I think about that mentorship, though, I think sometimes what happens is the individuals question the character of the person that they're with. In other words, are they really in it for me?
Hmm.
So here I was fortunate enough to watch, and at the time we had 75 employees, and all over. But I watched how my dad like sort of took care of them, took interest in them, and I thought to myself, if he cares this much about this guy, how much more does he care about his son?
Right.
So I had blind faith in that whatever he told me was for my benefit. I never had to question his motives. And I think some people in mentorship, they go, well, is he just trying to make money off me? Is this whatever that was about? So I never had that. In fact, what I would say is, if my dad said, Ro, see that wall? I want you to smash through that wall. I go, geez, that sounds pretty stupid, Pop. But if you say it, I'll do it. And I'd run through the wall, and so I didn't have to make the mistakes that so many people made of themselves. And he would tell me, Bro, I've made a lot of mistakes. He said, my job is to share those mistakes with you so you don't make the same ones. He said, the smart man learns from his own mistakes, but the wise man learns from the mistakes of others. So will you take that from me? And so I did. And then he would also tell me, he said, you have to be smart enough to be dumb enough to do what I tell you.
I love that
I said,
statement.
okay, that's I'll do it. And so it put me literally a decade ahead when I got back. And of course, I had an education in the area, better than most. So it put me a decade ahead of, my peers. And so that was the leapfrogging.
A mentor put you at least a decade ahead of your peers. I mean, just think about how much time, stress, aggravation that has meant to you. But not everyone has dad or that great mentor that they could rely on. I mean, that's just not something that some people grow up and maybe they don't have that. So if you didn't have that, what ways do you think you would recommend to others or to find that mentorship to help them run that business? Because it's so darn important.
Okay. So again, my father's father, my grandfather was in the business. He had deceased. So my father didn't have that. So what he was able to do back, now it's what, 80 years ago or so, he said, I'm going to find some peer group in order to be in that. Almost like Tab. I mean, obviously, Tab was not in existence at that point, the alternative board, but he built this board. And what he said to me is, I'm going to surround myself with the best people I can find. And then I'm going to trust them that they're not going to try to goof me up. And so I'm going to listen to them. I'm going to share ideas. And so they did this for his whole career. I mean, it was 43-year career. And so I watched that and I go, oh, geez, that sounds pretty good. So when I first heard about the concept of Tab out on Long Island where I live, I go, I got to go listen to what they're doing. And so I sat down and I listened, and they talked about having, a peer mentorship group. And I go, okay, I need to do this because I knew my dad was not going to be around forever. And in fact, that is the case. And I wanted to have the next generation or people that were outside. So that was how I watched my dad in a vacuum. And there is a vacuum at the top, and that's the problem. So how do you find a voice that cares enough about you to give you that kind of guidance that we all need it.
We do all need it. And you've continued on with in having peer groups in your life for at least that I know of for almost 20 years now?
Yeah.
Yeah. What has that meant to you?
Oh, you know,
I mean, you're a mentor to so
listen,
many, but
I
you're
still make a
still
bunch
giving.
of mistakes,
Yeah, of
but I
course.
can remember some of the ones that when I was working on things. I would say, Jason, and whoever's listening, one of the big mistakes is I thought I was a good hirer, so I'd hire fast, and then when someone wasn't working out, It took me forever to feel like I got to let him go. And so here I was in one of those predicaments, and I bring it to the board, and I said, "Listen, here's my problem." I said, "I got this situation, and now I got him on board, and I don't have a replacement for the individual, so I don't want to let them go." Now, here's what I heard from the tab group. Let me ask you, Roey, that individual, are they violating any of your core values? I said, "Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, they are." They said, "Then it's critical that you reject the virus. Forget that you don't have somebody. The fact that they're there." And so I looked at it, I go, "You're right." And I gave you the hope. If I didn't have that, now I'm still not a very good, I like everybody, so I would hire people, but I would bring those situations, and that kind of wisdom and outside influence has been made all the
Yeah.
difference. And
I had very similar situations. It gives you the confidence, it gives you the accountability to it. It's all that. It's been great. So let's talk a little bit about, in your business, your family business could have easily ended a long time ago. I mean, very, very few companies can say that they've made it 150 years where you guys are. But you shared a story in the past that there was a moment where you were at a real crossroads. You were at a crossroads early on in your career, and you were ready to leave your business. You were ready to leave this organization, your family company, if something didn't radically change in the way that it was being run. Share a little bit about that, because that's a real pivotal moment that you had, the legacy of the Organ family, all that. So tell me a little bit about that.
so now here I was heir apparent to the throne, right? And but in my work that I was doing, I felt like my potential was being limited by the work that we were doing and some of the associates that we had. And I was just frustrated. And I'd come home and and I'd tell my wife, and I'm sort of, down in the dumps, and yet I know that this is sort of laid out. And she finally said, "Roey, your father wants you to do what's best for you. So tell him." Here, talk about outside counsel.
Yeah.
So I said, "You know what? You're right." So I walk in to his office. I shut the door. I said, "This, hey, Pop, if this is it, I quit." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well,
Wow.
what we're doing is not how I see my best me, you know, being developed." And I said, "I'd rather have a boutique. I'd rather scale down, and not have, the 10 offices we have and be running all over." And all I could think of is, if this thing is going to grow, I'm going to go from 10 to 20, from 20 to 40, and I'm going to be a lunatic running. I said, I want to read it. And so my father said, "Then let's do it." That was within 5 minutes of my time. So let's do it. And so we did. We re-engineered, we threw off pieces, got rid of it, and set the tone for me to, take it from there. So that was a big step, but I give my father the credit, and because it's not easy, right? To
Well, it's nice to give your dad the credit, but you saw what you want. You understood your personal vision, and I give him enormous credit for supporting you in that. But I mean, you had the vision, and it's so nice that your mentor and what he's built for so long, he's willing to make that pivot, and it worked out pretty darn well, didn't it?
Well, we've had to pivot a lot of times. I mean, Jason, I've re-engineered myself literally every decade.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that actually, because I have
Oh,
some
okay.
questions on that. So
Okay.
hold that thought, because I think that's a really good thing, because especially these days. But I'm going to ask you about that. But let's first talk about your why. Let's talk about the why behind your work. One of the reasons that I feel so inspired by you is because your life, your work has truly been driven by a passion. I see it every single time I have the good fortune of spending time with you. So I just can't see you doing anything unless you really do have a strong why for doing it. And in the same way, that's why I've been leading the TAB organization now for over 2 decades. See, we're in the business for changing lives. And I also find entrepreneurs to be some of the most absolutely amazing, inspirational people in the world. So, what is your why? Why do you do what you're doing? Because you don't have to be doing this, but you're as busy as you are today, assuming you kind of retired because you didn't. So, why do you do what you're doing?
Well, initially, right, when I started, my father said, Roey, so I want to tell you one thing. He said, money can be a motivator, but he said it should never be the motive. And he said, what we need
Right.
to do is as we're visiting and helping these families, when they come in and they visit with us, when they go out, they have to be better off than they were when they started. Our job is to give them hope, help them get to where they want to go. And so that was my initial motivation. And he said, there is no replacement for education other than ignorance. And he said, the fact that you are, you know, uh, my son, he said, that doesn't do anything, or your grandfather. He said, listen, and I remember sitting him on the couch. He said, Mickey Mantle's sons wanted to play baseball. So he got him the batting audition. He says, there's only one trouble. They couldn't hit.
Good.
He said, so it doesn't make a difference who your father, your grandfather, your great grandfather, it doesn't make a difference. He said, this is up to you. So he said, if you're really going to make a difference, you've got to be the best you can be. And that's the point, is when they come in, knowing what we know and how do we help them structure. Now, here was the interesting part. This was the pivotal part. So I thought we were doing a great job. I'm in almost 30 years, and all of the plans we're doing, and we're helping prepare all of the money for the heirs, and then people started dying. Right? I'm working with an older clientele as the next
Yeah.
generation died. People started dying, and I realized that the things that we had thought were going to happen, geez, a lot of it didn't happen. Now, it wasn't because the plans and the legal work and all the arrangements and the buy sells weren't. Well, that stuff was in place. What happened, why the wheels fell off, it was the emotional part of the family, the relational part of the family. And I sat back and I said, oh my gosh, I said, we didn't really make that much of a difference. They look like, other families where, after generation, the thing falls apart. And so I sat back and I said, hey, first of all, what are these individuals asking for? Let me do that. So I sat back and I brought in some of my better clients. I said, listen, what is it that you really want? And they would start to talk, and I'm making notes. And he said, listen, we don't want our kids to fight over this money. We don't want them to be entitled. We don't, and they on and on. So I took all these notes down, and yeah, they didn't ask for a better return. They said, I want another 10 basis points on my investments. That's really what I want. It wasn't any of that. And so I looked, I said, we're answering questions today that none of these families are asking. I said, now, how stupid is that? I said, how can we answer the questions that they're asking? And so what they started to be is these more than money questions. And it was the fact that wealth was more than just money, right? And
And
so we
how did
have to
your
redefine that. Yep.
in your personal why, what was the driver for you so this is what they needed, but what was your personal why to commit to this?
Because I felt like if no one was doing this work, right, it would just be the same cycle over and over again. And what I
Right.
found is, having started early enough and having clients old enough and watching the cycle, by the time someone was in 30 years, in most cases, they probably didn't figure out what their career was till they were 30. Then they're in 30 years, and then they go, 60 years old, I think I'll pack it in. And so they give up and they pack up. And then the next guy does the same thing over and over again. And I watched it at 30 years. I go, I still got a lot of time. I can make a difference. And, my most impactful days are now, at 73 years old,
It's amazing.
looking
It's
forward.
true.
So
You know, so go back to what you were touching about it a little bit earlier. But we're talking about how you've had to pivot and you've had to reinvent yourself. I mean, you're not a person who sits still. You've reinvented yourself and your business, as you mentioned before, practically every decade. Now, that can't be easy. I mean, just making any change in businesses is really difficult. So I can imagine that was scary. I can imagine it was intimidating. I can imagine a lot of different feelings, but you did that. So many business owners today, they'll sit on their model because it's working for them up until the point it's not working for them. Right. So it's almost impossible when you think about how things are changing in this day and age that we don't have to think about evolving. So help us, take us through your perspective about what continual change looks like. And is there any real story or real takeaway that you feel the people listening today will really take? Because we're all up against that. But you've done it so many times. What big lessons have you learned or whatnot? Anything you'd like to share on
all right.
that would be
So
huge.
first of all, I'll say the pain is not in the change. The pain is in staying the same, right?
Well,
And
there's a
and I
nugget
think
for you.
one of the one of my God-given gifts, one of my GGGs, was that I could look around corners, right? It's if you go hunting, duck hunting, and you aim at the duck, you miss him, right?
Right.
You got to lead the duck and you got to be out in front. And that's the only way. And so you have to be out in front of that curve. And so what I would always do is say, in order for us to be successful, what must we look like 5 years from now? And then I said, if that's, and I would sort of dream up with a model. In fact, I did one, uh, I don't know how many years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. It was called Sustainability 2075. What would we have to do in business today in order for our family to be successful 200 years from now? And so I said, what is society going to look like? And then what are the things we do today? Well, that's a long shot, and it's out there, and the next generation can worry about it. But every 10 years or 5 years, I would look ahead and say, okay, where do we need to be aiming this thing? Where do we need to go? And what do we need to do in order to make sure that in this cycle, we don't wait? You talked about it. If you figure out that it's too late, you're over the hump, you've rode the wave too long, it's too late, right? And when you have to do it as this wave is spiking and you've got things going well, is when you have to have the intestinal fortitude to say, okay, now I'm shaking it up. And people in my office, they would say the same thing. Bro, what are you doing? Everything is going great. I said, exactly. That's why what we're going to do is take that profit that we have and we're going to reinvest it into the next wave. And you start any project, the first thing you do, you're underwater, right? But I had my own capital because I had the capital from the ventures that were doing well, and I'd invested. And by the time the other thing had sort of come to fruition, I only had 5 years experience. I knew how to do it better than anybody else, and I was there ahead of it. And then I do the next thing. I'd say, okay, where do we have to be 5 years from now? And so each one of those cycles, and the other part of that is maybe I got ADD or age or something, and I lose interest in something. But I knew that for me, the next thing that I'd be working on, and it was sort of a addition, right? We kept adding on to the thing. So as we built, our sort of multifamily office situation, that each one of these had the elements, and I had people running them. So I delegated off. That's part of my thing. I did learn from our staff facilitator years back. Is don't put it on your to-do list, put it on your to-don't list. And
I
that
love it.
to-don't list has been great. And I've been delegating and
The
making
to-don't
sure
list is
that I
such a
get
powerful
everything.
process, right? Such a powerful process. One of my favorite things when I speak to business owners, because you meet with folks and they always tell you a great story about what they did well and what they did wonderfully. But I love asking this question. I said, "What is your favorite mistake? Your favorite mistake?" we've been in business now for quite some time. And when I speak to someone who's looking to take the tab model to a different country or whatnot, I always tell them that you're going to benefit from the millions of dollars of mistakes and the scars and the trials and tribulations that I went through. So, because if you're not making mistakes, in my opinion, you're not really growing, you're not really learning. What would be one mistake, Roey, that you made in your career that ended up being such a strong either teaching moment to yourself or gave you an experience that now that you look back at it, you would never trade that for that one mistake that you
Actually, the one I talked about before, it was really sort of the people end of it. The
made? Mm,
process end I could get through, and if I made mistakes, but the people end and having people that violated the core values were not part of the culture, and they took away from that, right? And so you're either going to have that energy that's going to be moving this thing along, and I kept them around, and that was, you know, if I had to do it all over again, and I'm doing it over again, so I'm re-engineered myself. I mean,
so what have you
I
done
got
now?
out of the day to
Yeah.
day 5 years ago, and I transitioned out, and so I'm not making those mistakes. Hopefully, right now.
Yeah, being bold enough to make those changes. Um, Preparing for a successor. You've now managed to completely hand off one of your businesses to your children at this point, and now you've launched this other business, More Than Money, and eventually you're going to be handing off the day to day for this one. What have you learned, Roey, in all these years of business that you feel is really important to prepare for a successor or to prepare your successor that would be interesting for the folks listening today to know about transition and preparing for that?
Yeah,
Is there any big lesson you would give?
I think there are a few of them. First of all, you need to start the process sooner than you think you need to, right? I have a lot of fellas that deal with. They say, well, I'm not going to be ready to retire till I'm whatever 70, right? I said, how old are you now? 62. I got plenty of time.
Right.
Eh, wrong, right? When my dad did this, he called me and said, okay, Ro, we've got 7 years. He said, 7 years. And he said, I'm out. I'll tell you the day. And he did it to the day. And he said, so listen, you're going to start making the decisions. If you stub your toes, hey, I'm here to help you. But that's the point. And so I watched that. It worked for us. We saw too many family businesses. We dealt with hundreds and hundreds of family businesses over the year. And the old guy would stay on and he wouldn't know how to get out. And some of it is he didn't have any other interests and he liked what he was doing. But in fact, he was destroying or hurting, the succession plan. And so I said to myself, I'm going to do the same thing. I gave 7 years. It actually took me 9 years. I was a little slower at the switch, but it took me 9 years to get that transition. But a successful succession requires surrender. That is the most
Yeah.
difficult part of
So
this.
you're saying start earlier than you think.
Oh yeah.
What other things do you think are important in preparing that successor? I mean, you want the time because it does take time. I hear you. But as you're looking at preparing that successor, what else might you make sure that absolutely has to happen for that successor?
Oh, I think, these people, the people I had, heck of a lot smarter than I ever was and ever could be. What I needed to do is get out of the way, right? I know when my dad retired, um, his ghost haunted my office for 5 years. The
Mm,
office manager would say, Ro, your dad wouldn't do it that way. I said, he's not here. Yeah, but that's the way we did things. And I'm going,
yeah,
and it took 5 years. And I go, I'm not going to do that. I'm going
right.
to walk away and I am not going to micromanage. I'm going to prepare them and then get out. So it took two
And
things. One, it took
I think that's a
surrender.
hard thing to do, right?
Oh, it is. But so one, it takes surrender. And I can tell you that the day that transaction went, it was like someone died. Because prior to that, the phone rang. the day after I was a PIP, a previously important person. No one calls me anymore. I don't need it. So it was like if I didn't have something I was going towards, retiring towards, and rather than retiring from, I would have been really in bad shape. So that's the other thing I'd say is start to think about what your next thing is, as opposed to how much golf can I play or what other kinds of things. So to
You
let
know,
it go. But
y-
as you're preparing in that succession and letting go, it's giving those individuals the ability for them to make the mistakes. And so that is the toughest part to get mentally prepared for. And if you're not preparing yourself mentally for that, you're in for a big surprise,
yeah.
and it's a traumatic
Those
experience.
are those are three pretty big suggestions or tips, Enough time, plan way more than you think, get out of the way or be able to get out of the way because that's not the easiest one, and really know what you're going to be doing after you retire. So,
So I did one more thing, Jason, just to make sure that this was final. So they're cleaning up my stuff and they've got my desk. I had a, executive big red leather desk, big red leather chair, had it for a long time. So I'd amortized it and the cost was, zero now, even though I probably could have sold it for a lot of money. But I told the guys cleaning, I said, listen, you see that desk over there? I said, chop it up and throw it in the dumpster. They go, what? I said, yeah, throw it away. I said, see the chair? Throw it in the dumpster. Get rid of it. I'm not coming back. I've not been
wow.
back a day, 5 years. I
Wow.
went back once to see one old client. He said, hey, do you think Roey would come in to see me? I said, if it was there, every day was a great day for me.
Uh,
If it was there, I would have said to my wife, I'm just going to go in.
just check in a little bit.
Yeah, see what's
Yeah.
going on. And so I forced it upon myself to make that cut and say, okay, I'm done.
Wow. That's an incredible part of the story. You know, you built a lot. Your father, your grandfather, now your children are going to be building a lot. So let's talk about legacy. I mean, you and your family are really in the business of creating legacy or helping others create legacy. So, across both your previous and your current ventures right now, you are helping your clients think deeply about the lasting impacts that they are going to have with building their business and building their families. So, in business, we're often seeing that legacy takes many different forms. Some companies thrive across generations, like yours, while others stall. And it's just only measured in financial terms. Share a little bit, if you don't mind, your thoughts on how business owners should think about the legacy that they have and what kind of potential they could create with their businesses and have a legacy for their own.
Mhm.
How do you talk to business owners about that now? What would you suggest?
Well, we're all running the race, but
We are.
until you understand that the race we run is a relay race, then you'll never have a legacy, right? And that's the point, is that it's that handoff. And I did a little video about 2008. The Americans were in the U.S. Olympics in the relay race, and they had the best team. They expected to win, but they didn't. You know why? They dropped the baton. And that's the point. It's that pass off. And what they work on, those teams, yeah, they all know how to run fast. They work on this 6 phases of the exchange zone of how to get the baton and to get the next guy running as fast as they can. They're side by side. One guy lets go, the other guy picks it up, and they go. And if they miss that transfer, done. Same thing. We've got one shot at it. This is a relay race. And if we can't help that next generation come up and get them side by side and let go, because if you keep hanging on to it, I mean the whole thing, it's going to fall apart. And so that's the real success in succession comes in how to run this relay race and prepare for the exchange zone. All right? That's a key element.
It's a beautiful thing. And how important is the legacy for you? I mean, how important is that your great grandfather's company continues to move forward and your business? I mean, is that How much does that play in the way you think about your business and whatnot?
It doesn't as much today. I mean, when I was active, fear was my motivator, Jason. I
Yeah.
was afraid I was going to be the guy that screwed this thing up, right? And there really wasn't that kind of pressure. And if I did, so be it. And that's what I said. When I walked away, if the next generation blows the thing up, hey, it's up to them, so it's getting there. I mean, I think that the legacy that I want is not about the money. And that's the point. For these first 30 years, I was preparing the money for the heirs. And that was wrong. Now I'm preparing the heirs for the money, right?
Beautiful.
That's where the real legacy is coming. And the families and the ultra high net worth families that we're working with, they have more money. They couldn't spend it all, right? That's not the point any longer. It's how
Right.
not to screw them up. And so the
Absolutely.
legacy becomes more of, how do we develop unity? How do we develop relationships? How do we, all the other things. And
So
that's
before,
the factor.
yeah, so before I let you go, I think it's important because with all the beautiful business you've built, you're way even more than that. So we're about out of time, but I wanted to make sure that we touched on one more topic, and then I have one final question for you. But um, you started a not-for-profit,
Hmm.
and it happened and came from an idea from your daughter. But you're doing something incredible right now. Just share a little bit with the audience about what the work that you're doing in your not-for-profit, because I just think what you and the family are doing is so incredibly special.
Oh gosh, we need a whole another half hour. But what I will tell you, so fortunately, my daughter decided that she wanted to donate some shoes to orphans in Zambia. And I said, well, that sounds nice. We had a little foundation, and it was, $4.50 for a pair of shoes, $450. She had a granting authority at that year, $500. So I mean, that's it. Terrific. Then she comes back the next night, and she said, Dad, can I go to Zambia and hand out the shoes? I go, what? She said, there's no way. I said, you know what it's like? They got AIDS, and she's some saleswoman. So everything I did, she'd knock down this objection, knock down that objections, and then she finally closed with this one. She said, Dad, safest place for me to be is where God wants me to be. Oh yeah, how am I going to object?
You
So
just
I
gotta,
send her. She goes. She comes back. I said, how was it? Best day of my life. I said, what was? Day we handed out the shoes. You need to come. It'll change your life. Yeah, I know. I go, oh, yeah. Anyway, I went. 2007, I went. Met, we had 78 orphans from Kaliki Liki, this compound. And it's today, this compound, no electricity, no running water, dirt roads. It's like 2,000 years ago, right? Okay. So there they are, a couple little girls. So we support them. We put them through school. We get them through the university and done. And the one little girl's a teacher. She emails me a year ago, a year and a half ago, said, I want to go back to the compound and I want to start a school. And so I said, how much does it cost? Oh, very expensive. I said, how much? She said, well, the charter, I translated it to US dollars, it was $54. I text back, I said, I think we can help you with that. Right? Anyway, so this little girl and her start a school. School starts. There are 280 children going to the school now, renting at a bar. So the bar is like, hey, we think you can make more money, selling beer than we can helping to educate kids. So we just now broke ground, bought some property, building. We're going next week. We leave for a site visit. I've got 5 of my grandchildren going with us.
can't
But
believe it.
the story is not about us, right? The story is about this little girl who's going back, who's going to make a difference. And every day, 280 kids that would have been sitting on the street, with not out in education, have no chance to get out of poverty. And this girl now has just been married and has got a future.
It's
And
amazing.
so, yes,
Absolutely
and that's
amazing.
that's the amazing story. And we got to ride and have a ringside seat as we went along the way. And so we're the ones that got the blessing. So I said, you know what? Bringing my grandchildren along, and I want them to see what it's like and how we can make a difference. So
It's a real inspiration, Roey. Honestly, I mean, everything you've been doing, the purpose, the passion, what you're doing, and now leading this in
Well, I told you the race I'm
process.
running, I want to break the tape accelerating.
I love it.
I'm
I
not
love it.
slowing down.
All right, my last question for you. This has anything to do with business. So in my personal life, Roey, I'm a big fan of music. And when I spend a lot of time, and I always love asking someone, what was your first concert or your favorite musical experience that meant something to you? What would it be for you, Roey?
Okay, I got to give you two quick ones. Okay,
Yep.
number one, I sang in a group at college, and we studied Baroque art, architecture, and music. And we took a tour in 1971, 72, 72, and we sang at the opening of the Giuseppe Verdi Chorale. We sang at all the high masses at the Duomo in Florence
Wow.
and St. Marcos and St. Peter's and all that. But that opening at the in Siena at the Giuseppe Verdi Chorale, and I mean these were 17 good musicians that I traveled with, and the acoustics and the whole thing. I mean, the sound just, I get the hair goes up in the back of my neck. That's number one. Number two, I sang with my dad in the largest men's glee club in the United States in New York City for 25 years. And at one of the concerts at Lincoln Center, we're in our tails and we're singing. And a photographer comes over and he says, "Hey, you father and son?" We said, "Yeah. So I'd like to take your picture." Next thing you know, our picture's in Fortune magazine. And so Dad and I are in Fortune magazine for what business executives do in their spare time, to kill the time. So anyway, music is a big part of our family's
Two
life.
great stories. I appreciate you sharing that. Well, thank you, Roey. Well, that's it. That's all we have
Okay.
time for today. So, Roey, thank you so much. I can't express to you how grateful I am to be able to do this with you. I am hopeful that the audience really has some of the great nuggets that you shared today and help them improve their business, help them improve their life, and just think a little bit about what they're doing and be a bit more thoughtful about it. So,
Good. I
as I
love what
always
you're doing,
love to
Jason.
share,
Keep it up.
be
Thank you.
well, Roey. Be safe,
Okay.
be well, and be kind. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.